Welcome back, everybody. Gaming Grandpa here. Continue with the terms and definitions in part 4 of my MLS Explained tutorial. First off, if you hear wind in the background, I have software that reduces the sound. This wind is horrible today, so if you hear that, I am so sorry. Today I'm going to be talking about the contracts and for your roster. The senior roster makes up the first 20 slots. In order to register your team, you have to have a minimum of 18 players. These are usually your starters and subs. You don't need to fill slots 19 and 20 though, but I recommend you do, and I'll explain why in a bit. Your supplemental roster covers slots 21 through 30. I know what you're thinking. Why can't we just have a senior team? Why do we have to have all these rosters? Because contracts vary, and I'll get into that in just a bit. These players are usually your youngsters, backup players, your reserve players, B-team players, players that you might want to give a shot, and different things like that. Once again, those slots are not needed. Contract types for senior roster, designated players. These are your star players that make more money than the max you can pay on a senior contract. David Beckham was the very first DP in the MLS and is often referred to as the Beckham rule. Last year we had Gareth Bale, we've had Insigne, we've had a lot of DPs. You are given 2 slots when you first come into the league with an option to buy one more. It's a $150,000 one-time fee that gets taken out of the salary cap. Now, if you have a young DP that you're ready to sign, they'll waive that fee as long as you sign that young DP immediately. The third slot is always used on a young DP. It cannot be used on anybody else. The max salary budget charge is in effect here. Anything above that comes out of your team's payroll budget. And there is no limit on the salary. Whatever your team payroll budget is, you can pay up to that. These slots are not traded, but the players are. Young DPs, they have to be 23 or younger. The max salary budget charge is different depending on their age. And once again, the salary cap covers the budget charge only, just like DPs. So anything extra comes out of your payroll budget. A few years ago, the MLS wanted to have a lot more younger players that usually would get paid more money. So they come up with an under 22 initiative program. The max salary budget charge is the same as a young DP. The difference between that and young DPs is that the contract must end in the season the player turns 25. Okay? If you sign a 22-year-old to this contract and you want 4 years, you can't do that because he turns 26 and therefore he has to go 3 years or below. You can extend and you can offer new contracts to that same player as long as he meets the criteria for his age. So if you sign an 18-year-old to a first contract on this program for 4 years, at 22 you can sign him for another 3 years. All right? The salary cap covers, the budget charge only. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. It doesn't cover the entire salary. It's just like the young DP and the DP. It covers the budget charge only. My mistake. Now, the remaining contracts that fill your slots 1 through 20 are most likely going to be senior contracts, and I'll get into the exception here in just a sec. The max salary is $1 million over the max salary budget charge of $651,250. Now it's going to increase next year as long as it's not more than $1 million. You're good to go. I'm not going to get into the allocation buy downs yet. I will cover that later, but you can reduce their salaries for the salary cap. Now, if you don't use the last 2 slots, you're charged a penalty to your salary cap. And it's $85,444, which is the senior minimum salary charge. So my advice is use them. Why wouldn't you want to? Here's the kicker. You only need 18 players. So if you don't want to fill out the last 2 slots, go ahead and get you a couple reserve players or a couple senior minimum salary players to fill out your team, and that's good. Now, the salary cap doesn't cover those because they're a supplemental contract, but still, it helps you. All right? Like I said, always sign both of these slots. You don't want that penalty for not having a player. The supplemental roster is your last 10 slots. These are not required to fill, but you can. If you do fill them, you can fill them all 10 slots with senior minimum salaries if you prefer, or you can mix and match them. On reserve contracts, you can only have a max of 6 reserve contracts. You cannot have more than that. In order to have the 6, you must have 2 of them be homegrown players. All right, so if you sign a bunch of foreign players that aren't homegrown and you try to offer more than 4 homegrown or 4 reserve contracts, it won't let you. Sports Interactive has done a really good job with these contracts. Now, there is a caveat, there is a glitch. Like, say, for example, you currently have 2 DPs, and you want to sign a young DP, and you're allowed to sign 1. If you have 2 contracts in existence at the same time, of course it's going to let you offer that because it's based off of what you already have. All right. The problem comes when you accept one of the offers and he's now on your team, and then the second young DP comes in there. Then you're going to have that error and you can't sign him, and the player's ticked off, and it's a mess. So just be careful with how many contracts you offer and keep good track of that. And I will show you later in an example live on how to do that. Not in this episode though. All right. You can fill a supplemental roster with 10 homegrown players as long as you have no more than 6 reserve contracts. Another contract type that would fall under this roster, the supplemental roster, is your Generation Adidas contract players, and this comes directly from the MLS website. This is a joint program between MLS and Adidas that sees a handful of top collegiate underclassmen and youth national team players signed by the MLS to these types of contracts, and they're only made available in the Super Draft. That's the only place you can find them initially. You can trade for them. Every year you're allowed to trade for Generation Adidas contract players. It's not a big deal. As long as that team's willing to part with it, you're good to go. Now, once again, the league pays this full salary, and they don't fill up your salary cap. So the money that these contracts are on, these players, doesn't come out of your salary cap. So think of it as like a bonus. You know, you can sign these players and you don't have to pay for it. That's the good thing. Now, they either make the reserve contract or they make this SMS contract. They can't go over that for their first major league contract. Homegrown. The MLS and us Americans here decided to make this homegrown a whole different issue than what it is anywhere else. It's just ridiculous. Now, bear with me and follow along because this is very, very tricky. And this is in FM. The homegrown player rule is the MLS soccer program, or MLS program, that allows MLS teams to sign local players from their own development academies and sign them directly to first team rosters. The caveat is this player has to spend at least 1 year in a club's academy before the age of 15, while he also has to live in the club's territory. I will get into that in just a second. These are your youth academy players. In Football Manager, they come from a youth intake. Now, as those of us know, the youth intake is controlled by your head of youth development. So make sure you have a really good one. It's very important to MLS to have the best head of youth development you can have. Make sure he has a good personality and he has high stats, because he is what makes your youth academy up. Okay? In real life, you can go sign a 15-year-old from the U.S., but you can't sign him in Football Manager. It comes from your head of youth development. Okay? There's no limit on the amount of homegrown signings that you bring up to the MLS. As long as you could register them, you're good to go. And I'll explain all that in another episode. The MLS wants to protect our young players. They're tired of them going overseas without even having to pay compensation. And all that has changed now thanks to this program. What the MLS did, they took a map of the USA and they pinpointed where each club is at, and they made a radius around that pinpoint that says this is your location, your geographical area that you're allowed to get homegrown players from. Okay? LA Galaxy can't come to Missouri and sign a player to their academy. They cannot do that. It's not allowed because it's in our territory. They're encroaching on it. They get fined if they try, all kinds of other things. Okay? There are some areas in the U.S. that don't have an MLS team, and those are free-for-alls. Like Utah, for example. There's no club anywhere near there. It's an open territory. So any team is allowed to go get them players and put them in our youth academy. Unfortunately, in FM, we cannot do that. We can sign 15-year-olds from Brazil, but we can't put them in our youth academy. We have to give them a senior contract, or a senior roster or a supplemental roster contract, if that makes sense. Are you follow me? It gets really tricky. Once again, your youth academy are players only from the youth intake. Now, when you offer them their first major league contract, that's when they officially become homegrown, and the salary cannot exceed $125,000 over the reserve or SM contract. Expansion teams have a little bit of a flux. Because their youth academies aren't really in existence yet, they're allowed to go around and sign players, bypassing the one-year requirements. St. Louis City in real life has done that. They signed a 15-year-old kid not too long ago to his first major league contract. He's playing for the B team now, I believe. But he bypassed that entire process because we are brand new to the league. So expansion teams get away with that, but not in FM. Once again, in FM, we cannot sign players to our youth academy. It's just really complicated. Matter of fact, we can't even offer a player a youth contract. It's not allowed. It does not happen. It won't happen in FM, and it gets confusing to a lot of people. Just remember, youth academies, youth intake. All right? All you can do is let them players leave the academy or sign the ones you want to an MLS contract. All right, moving on. International players, the last term we're going to cover. That is any player that's not considered domestic. They're not a U.S. citizen, they don't have a green card, or they're not a permanent resident. There's a few other things, like you could have a German dad and an American mom, and now you could play for America too. It's really different. The main way to tell that it's an international player is when you're signing their contract, it will pop up in the bottom of your screen with that little red bar that says this will impact your international player slots. Keep that in mind. Also, check their nationality. A lot of people might think somebody from Ghana that's played in the league a few years is an international player. He might have a nationality of American. I will have a live example of that in the last episode. You must have at least 5 international players on your registered roster. You start with 8 permanent slots when you first come into the league and an expansion team. You are given 8 permanent slots. These are yours to do with what you will. All right, just remember, you can't trade away 4 of them or you're screwed because you can't register your team without having 5 internationals, and now you don't have the slots, okay? You can trade the players and the slots. You can trade them from 1 year up to 5 years. You can trade them for permanently. Don't trade permanent slots. Trade 4 permanent slots, but don't give them away, okay? That's very important. Now, I'm sure you're going to have a lot of questions on this. Leave me comments. I will definitely get back to you. Leave a thumbs up if you like what I'm doing. Let me know how things are going. And subscribe to get more videos because I am not even halfway done yet. Anyhow, thanks again, guys, and have a good day.